There are a few constantly reappearing monsters in the Final Fantasy franchise outside the summons. You have these cute furry creatures that look like a cross between a bear and a cat and Moogles, and a chicken-like beast that people ride around on called Chocobos. Moogles and Chocobos have become the series mascots, and yet one has its own series of games, and the other hasn't even been considered for a game. Anyway, much like when Nintendo released the Game Boy, Squaresoft saw an opportunity and wanted to start making money off. Now, technically, these games aren't considered canon or part of the main series, but they still have characters that play a vital role instead of just being unlockable characters to play as. First game we're going to take a look at that is based off of the Chocobo is Chocobo Dungeon 2 for the PlayStation 1. Released in Japan on December 23rd, 1998 and North America on November 30th, 1999, Chocobo Dungeon 2 was an RPG that's classified under the roguelike genre. It was developed and published by Squaresoft, yet not a lot is known about it. I did a Google search on it, and even the wiki couldn't tell me much about who directed it or did work on the game. Now, you may have a few questions about what I just said, such as, what's a roguelike, or where's Chocobo Dungeon 1? Well, I got some answers for you. First off, there was a Chocobo Dungeon 1. It was released only in Japan for PlayStation 1 on December 23rd, 1997. It was called Chocobo no Fushigina Dungeon, which translated to Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon. I assume that it didn't sell that well, and that's why we really never got it. As for the term roguelike, it's a genre that originated on the PC. Several of the earliest games in the genre date back to the 1970s. They're originally built off concepts from games like Adventure. Another example of these games is Beneath Apple Manor. These games also have several common elements to them, those being procedurally generated levels, spawning monsters and treasures, permanent death or high cost for death, tile-based graphics, and turn-based combat. The way each level works is that every character would move one tile at a time. This would in theory give people enough time to think about what your next move and plan out levels. I'll get into that later. Some of the concepts used in the genre would even be used to some extent in later RPGs to allow for tactical planning against monsters you can see on screen. This genre would create cult classics such as Your Dreams, Nightmare Duraga, and lay the groundwork for games like Crypto the Necrodancer. As for the plot, it's pretty generic, and yet it's playful enough for a younger audience to get into. While hanging out with his Moogle friend, our nameless Chocobo hero finds a dungeon full of mystery. Along with his friend Mog, they journey into a dungeon to see what's inside. Hopefully it has lots of tasty nuts to eat. The graphics are really good considering the genre it's in and when it came out. On the other hand, it's not all that spectacular. When this game was released, there was games that looked a lot better than this. Games like Resident Evil 3 and Sonic Adventure was either on its way or was already out, just to name a couple. Not to say it looks bad, but when you're one of the guys who set the standard for cinematic production, this comes off as under par. With all things considered, it's still one of the best looking roguelikes out there at the time. 3D graphics look great. Sure, it uses the same kind of color scheme for a bunch of floors in a dungeon, but what makes up for it is that the monsters look great, the world is colorful, and the cinematics are on par with what the PlayStation 1 has to offer. The only other problem I think people will have is that the game looks kinda childish. Yes, I know it's supposed to look like a child's storybook. I personally like the look and feel of the graphics. At the same time, I think some people will find the graphics to be a deterrent to the game. The music is decent at best. Fits how kiddie the game looks fairly well. Again, it may turn away some gamers and yet bring in others. For me, it's nothing that's going to set the world on fire, yet it's not annoying either. The gameplay is okay at best. Not only am I not a fan of this kind of RPG, but for what it is, it doesn't drive me nuts. I always thought that roguelikes used a system that was a way to artificially add difficulty to a really boring and repetitive game. While I still feel it's a repetitive game, it's not as bad as others. There are a few things that make this a little bit different from your average roguelike at the time. First is that the game has a fusion system. You can combine different items together to make a stronger item. You can only combine two of a certain type of item together, like two weapons, armor, potions, and so on. You also need a catalyst, like a magic spell, for the fusion to work. This makes inventory management easier, as you can run around in the dungeons, find another place to fuse items instead of throwing them away for others. The magic system is also unique. The way that spells get more potent is by using them. Over time, if you keep using spells, they'll get level ups. Again, another way to make inventory more manageable and reward you for using spells. Not to mention, with how spells only take up one inventory spot per spell, it doesn't punish you for burning through potions because you are low on inventory. Over time, spells end up being more useful, and you spare those rather than the standard healing items, which in the long term take up more inventory room compared to the single inventory spot that cure spell is taken while you have 20 or 30 of them. My only real problem is that yet again, I'm not a fan of the roguelike genre. While Chocobo Dungeon 2 lightens it up by only taking your inventory and half your gil if you die, it still doesn't change the fact that this is a really repetitive game. You will go through the same looking level so many times to see the end, only to have to go back for a healing item because no one ever dropped one. That it would drive me nuts trying to finish this game. I have no idea why I've always seemed to get the short end of the stick in these kinds of games, but that's another reason why I hate them. Plus, every time you go back to town, you have to start from floor 1 again of that specific dungeon unless you have like a specific item that says, oh, you start here instead of floor 1. Like in most roguelikes, you keep your level, and over time that makes fights a joke. Well, until you get back to the floor you're on, only to have to go back to get a stamina item because your stamina is running really low. In its defense, Chocobo Dungeon 2 is not a bad game. Yeah, I think veterans will find it too easy. On the other hand, I think that it feels like a game for people to start off with if they want to play games like it, or it's a game for a younger audience despite some of the subject matter. There are elements of a good roguelike, but at the end of the day, I'm not its target audience. Overall, Chocobo Dungeon 2 is an okay game for me. If you're looking to get into this style of game, that's a good place to start. Just don't expect it to set the world on fire or expect it to be the greatest of its kind. I give it a 6 out of 10, but you can tweak my score if you're more into roguelikes or this style of game.